Good morning, everyone. Jim Wieser here, and the Wieser Podcast. It's been a while since I've had the opportunity to be here, but we're going to become a pretty regular staple here, starting actually today. Today's Tuesday, whatever, the 24th, is it of March? One of those days. Yeah, the 24th of March. It's good to be with all of you. I'm particularly excited about being here with not only a favorite guest, but one of my most favoritist people, Michelle Feynman, the director of the Lake County Board of Elections and Registration. And we want to talk to you today about several items related to elections, which, of course, are the core of our democracy, and quite frankly, are being threatened right now. And we'll get into that, but I want to just start out with something a little different, just for a couple of minutes. So if you'll indulge me in this. Last weekend, a great American patriot, a great American hero, a great public servant, Robert Mueller, passed away at age 81. And I'm sure most of you know him from the Mueller report, from the investigation into the 2016 election, which he conducted. But there's some things you don't know about Robert Mueller that are more telling and more critical about his commitment to our country, his commitment to our form of democracy. And I bring it up because the first thing I heard about his death was a post on Truth Social by the President of the United States, who said that he was glad to hear he was dead. He was glad to hear that Robert Mueller was dead. That's such an abhorrent and appalling statement. I don't even know how to work around it, so I'm not going to work around it other than to say this. Robert Mueller was a brilliant student in school, went to Princeton on a scholarship, left Princeton, I believe it was his sophomore year, to join the Marines and go to Vietnam and fight for his country. While he was there, he was wounded, came back, recovered, and everybody said, okay, he's going to go back to school. No, he went back to Vietnam. He went back to Vietnam while the President of the United States, who said he was glad that Robert Mueller was dead, was in his fourth or fifth shot at making sure that he could evade the war by falsely claiming bone spurs. That's what we're facing in this era in our country. And it's so sad. And it's sad because to think that anybody would say something like that. But when the leader of the country, the President of the United States, makes that kind of a statement, that kind of a derisive, divisive, awful statement about somebody who was an true American hero, unlike our president, it impacts our entire country, because he's the leader. He's supposed to show empathy and compassion and caring. And time again, when given the opportunity to do that, he fails. He just fails miserably, and it impacts all of us. And what's even worse is there were several thousand likes of that post. I mean, that shows you the work that we have to do in this country to make us the kind of democracy that we were, the envy of all the other countries in the world a short 5 or 10 years ago. But now, having said that, getting off my soapbox on that, I want to get to maybe the most critical and important way that we can ensure the continuation of our democracy and our constitutional form of government, and that's through the election process. And there is nobody more well-versed and know more about the practical aspects of election than my good friend and the director of elections, Michelle Fayman. So we're going to focus on a couple of issues, and I asked Michelle to do this because I was so startled by a headline, and I think I brought it here with me, by a headline that was in one of the newspapers Saturday that says Beckwith, who is our lieutenant governor, condemns elections office. And I was thinking, wait a minute. Well, I was the election board attorney on and off, I don't know, for a long time working with Michelle. I was the county chairman for 8 years when I had the good fortune to run or be the head of, along with the Republican chairman, the operation of the office. And I said, they can't be talking about the office that I'm familiar with, and the office that I know is the best run office in the state of Indiana, and I know that because I used to sit there when the co-director of the Indiana Elections Commission used to call Michelle and ask her opinion on something, and because she wasn't sure, and she wanted to know if she could get that from Michelle, because this is how steeped and how in elections and how knowledgeable Michelle is. So I wanted to start out with the issue that caused a headline that says the lieutenant governor condemns our Lake County Board of Elections and Registration, and doesn't surprise me. He would condemn probably makes sense because unfortunately our lieutenant governor, who the governor didn't even want as his running mate, comes from a white Christian nationalist background, so we kind of know what his feelings are. But it has to do with a program that Michelle developed with her staff, and it's called Behind the Ballot, I think. Yeah. Behind the Ballot. So first of all, I want to introduce Michelle to you all, and maybe Michelle just give everybody a hint as to how you were able to get up this early in the morning, and show Michelle is not an early riser, and tell them what you do, how you got there, what you do, and what Behind the Ballot is, because it's really a phenomenal program.
So I've been with the county for 37 years. I've been the election administrator and director. The Behind the Ballot was a concept I came up with all through the years. A lot of organizations will call us up and ask us to come out and do voter registration, information classes about the voting, and so forth. And I kind of based it off of, I go to the Black Ministers Alliance in Gary all the time. Or, they'll have a meeting and they'll bring in 15 churches and we'll discuss it. And so it's kind of like a train the trainer. And so I wanted to expand that and do it on a larger scale, do an open house at the government center on a Saturday morning, and kind of go over the difference between the federal voter registration forms, the state voter registration forms, the different ways of voting. We had some history there of the old Iron Horse machines and the differences that we brought through on the machines. We talked about the pitfalls of voting. We talked about the security that goes into elections. Every year, we'll hear a question saying, I saw a white panel van outside my polling place and they're stealing the votes. We're not hooked to the internet, so that's not happening. And so we kind of opened up those curtains of Behind the Ballot to let people know what all goes on at the office, how much bipartisanship there is when it comes to the ballot, of the protection of it, and that we want free and fair elections for everyone. So it was a train the trainer aspect of it. And then what we did was we expanded it and reached out to a bunch of different agencies that are voter registration and give those type of services, and invited them. And we invited over 27 different groups to come. In the beginning, we said we would have 10 vendor tables out in front. So that way they could also showcase what they did beyond the voter registration. And so we put that out there early and said, first come, first serve. The first 10 that come we'll get a table. And that's what we did. And it ended up being a great event. We had great information, a lot of good stuff going on, and then the next day when we hear that we've been condemned for doing it because one organization came in late, didn't get their paperwork in on time. There was 3 actually that we didn't have room for. They were one of the last ones to come in, and they were upset that they didn't have a spot. And they kind of wanted us to change everything at the last minute to make accommodations for them when we had already had plans for what we could accommodate. We had tables, chairs, and everything there. So that was behind the ballot.
Yeah, well, and the organization, if you can, if you know about it, if not, we'll educate some folks here. The organization that came in late, I believe is connected to the organization that Charlie Kirk was.
Yes, Turning Point.
Turning Point was the leader of, and I believe now it's his a widow who's running it. And I may not agree with Turning Point and their approach to government and elections, and their approach to allegedly teaching young people the value of elections, when in fact I suspect that their motivation is other than that. But they have their right to be heard. The problem, and you could tell me, is what they do is there's nothing wrong with religion and politics and having discussions but it's wrong when it becomes partisan. It should be nonpartisan, and it becomes partisan, and that's what my observation of Turning Point is. However, maybe you can discuss, if you can, real quickly, as that seems to serve as the basis for the lieutenant governor's ire, is that they didn't get a chance to bring their form of partisan politics to the event that day, when in fact it was a nonpartisan event.
Correct, and that's what we told everyone, is that, when you bring your materials, it all needs to be nonpartisan. I did speak with the gentleman afterwards, and he identified himself. And I said, I appreciate anyone that can get young folks out to vote and to register. And my hope is that the young folks just learn the difference between fact and fiction and what is the truth. And we sat there and said, no politics. And yet people overheard him actively talking about trying to get out 2 senators who didn't do what they wanted, and we're going to take them out. Not physically, but take them out of office. Yeah. I don't want to, encourage any harm or anything like that. And so he was actively talking about it. We had conversations about the SAVE Act. A lot of the information he had was misinformation. And it was so funny because there was a lady standing next to me, and I don't even know who she was. But as he was talking, she's like, well, that's false, that's false, that's false. And they stated they wanted to come out and register voters. The whole intent of this was groups that do voter registration. So when I stated in the paper that there was 99% of the people were already registered, the small percentage were 2 young children who we know that are under the age of probably 6. And they're, of course, not eligible to register to vote. So everyone there was registered to vote. And so their whole point of doing that was, like, as I said, know your audience. These are individuals that already know it. So.
Yeah. Yeah. That's an interesting point. It goes back to some of our earlier podcasts. When I say earlier, prior podcast, I should probably say prior podcast. You may recall the controversy that surrounded the whole issue of midterm redistricting throughout the country. And a focal point of that was the state of Indiana, because they were certain, they being those that wanted to do the redistricting, primarily the Republican Party, that wanted to redistrict to try to create more safe, supposedly safe Republican districts. And it came to Indiana, and to a lot of folks' surprise, yours truly included, the Indiana Republican Senate blocked it in the state of Indiana when the president and other leaders, the governor, in this party were sure that they were going to get their way and engage in this blatant political activity to try to. It wasn't enough that they have 7 out of 9 congressional seats. They wanted 9 out of 9 congressional seats, and specifically, we're broadcasting from Lake County, Indiana, and specifically, they wanted to go and defeat or redistrict and in that regard, hopefully defeat the Democratic Congressman Frank Mervan from here, from the 1st District, and the Congressman from the 7th District, Andre Carson, the 2 Democrats. So it was a big deal, and it was a big issue, and they were visibly upset. I mean, incredibly upset. And fortunately, when you're in this business as long as I've been, you form relationships with a whole lot of people. And I'm happy to say and proud to say I've got strong relationships with people who clearly identify themselves as Republican. I worked with them in the election office for years and years. I worked with them across the aisle as an elected official. And they tell me what's going on. And this goes back to what Michelle said. Those people had their interest, Turning Point's interest, and this is my opinion, had nothing to do with education and teaching people how to register to vote and how to vote and doing all those things that the behind the ballot program was set up to do. Their interest was it was going to be partisan, their partisan politics, and they were going to say, hey, these guys, I think specifically, my assumption is they were probably referring to Senator Dan Durnall and Senator Rick Niemeyer, 2 Republican senators from this area, who they have vowed to get.
Right.
And the proof's in the pudding. I think Dan's got 2 opponents, I think, doesn't he? I know for sure 1, but I think 2 running against him. And they're going and they're, well, what do they want to do? How does our president govern? By retribution. You don't support me, you're not loyal to me, I'm going to get you. I don't care who you are. I don't care how supportive of me you were. If you cross me in any way, shape, or form, and I perceive it to be damaging to me, you're history. You're gone. And that's was the intent, in my opinion, of that organization. And they got called out on it, and Michelle stood her ground, and properly so, and they're just agitated about it. But
we didn't
go
even
ahead.
know Turning Point was even
Right.
really in Indiana too much. My counterpart, who is a Republican, signed up on the paperwork with me early on about it. So it was well advertised. We pretty much, it was our first time, so we were blasting as much as we could. And the point is sometimes you kind of wonder, do they wait to the last minute to do it so they can get these headlines? Because Beckworth never called us and never asked for, why did this happen, or, how can we solve this issue? That didn't happen. It was just blast us. And then you recall, even the Secretary of State, when he came up here for the precinct consolidation, for the merging of municipal elections, I believe they said Lake County does it best for the voting process. And so here you have the Secretary of State even saying how great of a job we do. Yeah. He's of the opposite political party. And I'm very proud of the work we've done. We've done, we were the first to ever do this behind the ballot. We have, in Lake County, we've received Cleary Awards, which this is very exciting too. Cleary is through the EAC, and this is their 10-year anniversary. And every month of this year, they're going to showcase individuals who have won a Cleary Award. Now, there's been hundreds of them over 10 years. When we won, I think there was 32 of them. They contacted us the other day, and Lake County is going to be showcased in next month's edition of The Best of the Best. So
that's
very
awesome.
Proud of that. And so we do great things here in Lake County. We work really hard. We've done some new materials even recently. And one thing I do want to talk about real quick, just it's not off subject, but if you do a mail ballot, they have a new law out there that if you don't date your absentee, it will be rejected. And so if anyone on here votes by absentee ballot, by mail, make sure you date your ballot. And that was one of the things we wanted to do with Behind the Ballot, was let people know of the pitfalls of what can happen to your ballot. Just comparing your signatures. We all know we have our Walmart little scratchy signature, and then we have our professional one that we do maybe on our taxes or important documents. And those things come into play when matching up ballots and the bipartisanship of reviewing signatures. So always make sure you're clear and consistent and have a conforming signature when it comes to your ballot.
Yeah, this is the fun part about working with Michelle for so many years, because if Michelle didn't start getting off track,
Yep.
I know that her off track is how I know she should be on track. That's how her off track is.
But I
So
know you'll
I'm
take
used
over
to
if
that.
I don't get in my stuff, and so I got to do my public service announcement there.
Yep, I'm so used to that. But the good thing is it leads us right into subject number 2, which I think is maybe one of the most threatening pieces of legislation ever in our lifetime. I'm not going to say ever, but certainly from when we had the good part, which was the Voting Rights Act in the 60s and the Civil Rights Act in the 60s and all those good things, we are now facing the possibility of completely reversing those concepts and taking us to what they so I don't want to say cleverly hide. They choose these acronyms for their legislation to hide their real intent. It's called the SAVE Act. It's a piece of federal legislation that has, in fact, passed the House of Representatives on a strictly partisan vote, and is now in the United States Senate, where, thank God, I'm reasonably certain it will not pass because of the filibuster rule and the requirement that you need 60 votes to pass it. But it's a subtly devastating piece of legislation that will turn the clock back way back past the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act by their requirements to allegedly, one, secure the vote, which, as you heard Michelle say before, one of the things we are proud about in Lake County is how secure our voting system is and how secure it's proven. Number two, to their cry that fraud in the elections, which is totally unproven, totally untrue. And I know they did that one study, and it came out that the fraud in the 2024 election, the discovery of fraud or the awareness of fraud was 0.0000007%. That was it. So again, it's the Republican Party proposing a solution in search of a problem. When the problem doesn't exist, they've always got the solution. When problems do exist, they have no solutions. But to get to the SAVE Act, which is complex and a little bit difficult to understand, but it essentially is a method by which you can suppress hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of votes. And so I'm going to kind of kick it off by throwing it to you and let the folks know what you believe the SAFE Act is about and how it applies.
So the SAVE Act will require every person to show proof of citizenship, which currently under federal law we are all already attesting to when we register to vote, that yes, we are a citizen of the United States, and yes, we're going to be 18 years of age. This is going to make you show proof of it in person. And so for women, you're going to have to show, for anyone, you're going to have to show your birth certificate or your passport. Now, how many of us have passports? I got mine, and I just got it probably 4 or 5 years ago. It cost, I believe, $160. Yeah. We got my daughter's not too long ago. We didn't get it in time, had to go up to Chicago, had to sit there at the building for, I think, about 7 hours waiting to get it so we can get it in a rush. It's not something you can get fast. It's not something you can get cheap. And so when it comes to your birth certificate, a lot of people are like, oh, I can get my birth certificate, no problem. Okay, think about if you were born in New Orleans maybe, and the floods came through and everything is gone. Or if you were a home birth and maybe not have the birth certificate. But beyond that, as a woman, we've gotten married probably. And so now our name on our birth certificate does not match our name on our driver's license. And so if you've not been lucky in love and maybe you've gotten a divorce, then you now have to go get a copy of your divorce decree, and maybe you've gotten remarried again. So it's cost, and elections should never cost. This is your constitutional voting right, and it should never cost you money. And so my mom recently just had to go get hers, and this is what I talked about at Behind the Ballot. She needed her star ID so she could fly. Indiana star ID will not be sufficient. And so for her, she went to the BMV four times.
Excuse me, let me just interrupt. Will not be sufficient for voting purposes.
For
okay,
voting.
just
You
want
can
to
fly.
make that clear.
You can fly, but you can't vote. But yes, my mom went to the BMV 4 times, then had to go get her birth certificate, and then had to go to the clerk's office. That was a lot of running around for a 90-year-old lady. And to sit there, and then you have to present your proof at the election board office. You have to present it in person. And so think of our transportation system here in Lake County. When we were going against the vote centers, that was one of the problems, is that we don't have good transportation. And so for people to bring those to us and show us proof of it, and then there's no good fail-safe out there. Like right now we have fail-safe voting methods, whereas if someone doesn't have something, they can attest to it. So then they put penalties on if they were to attest to it, then that it could be a penalty to the election board for accepting it if it wasn't accurate document. So then they can criminalize us at the election board for trying to do our job. And so it kind of goes back to, so all the online voter registration that we currently have now, you've moved ahead in progress, set you back now, no longer online voter registration because there's no way to show the proof of it. Back in the day, we used to have deputy registrars where you'd have to get signed and sworn before you could register someone. That's going to kind of, like, no one can assist you on registering. Vote by mail, pretty much gone because you're going to have to show proof of your documents. And then if you challenged me and came and said, I don't think she's a citizen, he can challenge me, and then I have to produce it again. So each and every time I move, I would have to produce it again. How many times do we have to keep producing the document to show that we're U.S. citizens and that we're eligible, when in fact we're already attesting to that now? It's something that we don't need, but it's also going to disenfranchise a lot of voters who don't have transportation, who don't have the funds available to get a passport. And sometimes if I was born in another state, now I'm having to go through the mail, get a copy of that certified birth certificate, send it to me, snail mail. It takes a long time to get to the mail. So what we were telling people at the session is, when in doubt, start getting some of your documents ahead of time, because we don't know what this is going to do. And it goes effective immediately. So here we are already getting into the elections. Ballots have already gone in the mail at this point in time. We're going to start early voting, and voter registration ends in a couple weeks. The implementation of all this right before the election, and this is a federal election, so it's going to apply to this one if it passes, just the lack of planning on all this too.
Yeah, well, it's no different than anything they do. It's, you get into the Iran war and you bomb away, and then you say, oh, okay, well, we were kind of successful doing that. What do we do now? Oh yeah, we forgot about the plan of the after effect. The law. I've always operated in politics and government as the law of unintended consequences. And when you pass a law or attempt to pass a law, there's always unintended consequences, and you have to try to anticipate that. And they don't.
And they can either.
And what's really, to me, what's incredibly frustrating about all of this is the attempt to say, first of all, this is a voter ID bill. That's what they started out with. This is just a voter ID bill. That's all it is. Well, first of all, I think there's 28 to 30 states that already have voter ID, including our state, Indiana. We already have a voter ID bill, and it works very effectively. You just show up with either your driver's license or a state-issued valid license. Perhaps you're a student at IU or Purdue, and not anymore. No,
Not
can't
anymore.
use that.
Back up.
And these are valid. It's always more restrictive, more restrictive, more restrictive. Why? And that goes to the heart of the problem. There is no answer to the why because it doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. There is no problem of any significance, widespread problem of voter fraud. It's a creation that now it's become inflamed by the president, who started the whole thing out in 2015, riding down the golden and gilded escalator, saying, Barack Obama is not a citizen of the United States. We can't find his birth certificate. Well, so here we go 11 years later, and they're back to that old ruse again, that old kind of a lie again, that old kind of a falsehood again. And so people would be put to these, as Michelle was demonstrating with her mother's example, these unbelievable extremes to just to be able to vote.
Right.
I mean, you could do thousands of other things in your life with just showing an ID card, and anywhere. If you want to pick up a pharmaceutical, if you want to do whatever you want to do, you just show your ID, and it's acceptable worldwide, except for this one purpose.
And getting a driver's license or an ID is not that simple either. I mean, you've got to go through steps of showing proof of who you are just to get that. And one of those things that you're showing is your birth certificate usually. And so people sit there, I see it all the time on social media, they're like, I'm a woman and I feel offended that this is out there and that, you can't get your birth certificate. Those are a lot of people that maybe grew up here in Lake County, and then you can go right to the health department. It's not that far. But when you were born in another state and have to go through the work of presenting evidence of who you are just to get the birth certificate, you can't just go in and say, I want a copy of a birth certificate. You have to show proof of who you are in order to get that birth certificate a lot of times if you're going in person. And so it's not always that easy. I have a couple cars. The people that are saying these things probably have a couple cars, have transportation. They're not talking to the individuals that don't have those things or born out of state and have to go through all this in order to vote. It's our right to vote. What are you afraid of? We sat there and said they want to get more young people voting, yet we take away their ID for schools.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like we move forward, then we move back. Which is it? Do you want young people voting? Do we want people voting at all? Maybe they don't. Maybe it is what he said not too long ago, that, hey, this may be the last election you have to vote in.
Yeah. Well, folks, if you just don't turn a blind eye to it, look, see what is going on, see what they're attempting to do. They want to suppress the vote. They don't want to encourage the vote. They don't want to protect the vote. They want to suppress the vote. And that is a first major step towards a form of government that we are not familiar with, that is not consistent with our Constitution, that is denigrating to the 250 years that men and women and citizens have fought for our right to vote and for our democracy. It's such a foreign concept to all of that. And that's what's so frustrating. I had a conversation about a month ago, about a month ago, with a good friend of mine, former next-door neighbor, close friends, and they, for business purposes, moved to Denver, Colorado. Still stay in touch, still see them, still talk to them. They were back in the area recently. And we were talking, and he's he's always claimed an allegiance to the Republican Party as a voter, which is fine. And he and I used to have great discussions on Sunday afternoons. Maybe got a little more spirited and heated the more we decided we needed to have maybe a drink along with it. But that's beside the point. The fact is, we had a discussion. He said, "Well, why? I don't get it, Jim. Why are the Democrats opposed to a voter ID law?" I said, "A voter ID law? What are you talking about?" He caught me by surprise. I said, "What are you talking about?" "Well, you know that the voter ID law that's being considered in Congress." And I said, "Are you talking about the Save Act?" And he said, "Yeah." I said, "Mike, first of all, you used to vote in Indiana a number of times. You know we have a voter ID law. We already have it. What is it about the Save Act that you think is so significant when we already have a voter ID law?" So he said, "Well, it's just a basic voter ID law that would make it applicable around 50 states." I said, "Well, number one, the Constitution clearly gives the authority to the states to conduct elections and to promulgate rules and regulations to conduct those. So that's one thing." I said, "Secondly, Mike, look at what's going on. I don't know what's happening in Colorado, can't speak to it. I know what's happening in Indiana, and I could speak to that. And there's a bill in the legislature right now to restrict the number of early voting days that we can have, so that we're at 28, I believe.
We're at 28, and they were trying to take it down to
16.
And we have over 90,000 people in Lake County. We have the best in the state for our 11 early voting sites.
Yep.
And for the hours that we have, and over 90,000 people utilize it, because we don't all have a way to get to the polls on Election Day, and it's very safe and effective.
Yeah. And I explained that to him, and then he kind of argued back a little bit and said, "Well, Election Day is Election Day. It doesn't." I said, "Yeah, no, Mike, Election Day is to ensure that everybody has access to voting and convenience to voting when that can occur and happen, so more people will vote." I know in Schererville, I live in Schererville, Indiana, I know that in 2024, we almost had a 50-50 split between those who voted early and those who voted on Election Day. That's incredible. That's because the voters have become educated to it. They're aware of it. More people will come out, and it just makes all the sense in the world to encourage voting, not to discourage or dissuade voting. For those of us that have been in the business of voting and making it more convenient and providing more and effective polling places. In fact, thank you for finally changing the early voting site in East Chicago. It was a nightmare.
We've got a couple more to do.
Yeah, and they've got a few more to do. We try to make it as convenient as we can because we, on our side of the aisle, on the Democratic side of the aisle, we want people to vote. I don't want Democrats just to vote. I want Democrats to vote. I want independents to vote. I want Republicans to vote. That's what makes our democracy a democracy. Mm-hmm. And that's what separates us from where we're headed if the Republicans get their way. And that's what separates us from the Viktor Orbáns and the Vladimir Putins and so many of them along the way that somehow our president seems to kind of enjoy and pal around with and buddy up to. So that's really significant to us. Like I said before at the beginning of the program, and we'll start now to wrap the program up. But that's what it goes to the core of our democracy. It's voting. It's the opportunity for everybody who's a United States citizen and everybody who's a registered voter and everybody who's above the age of 18 or 18 and above, I guess I should say, to vote, to make the selection between folks that are crazy enough sometimes to put their name on the ballot and to say, I want to serve the public. I want to be a public servant. That's what it's all about. And there's so many of them. I told you at the beginning of the show, I talked about Robert Mueller, and a person who dedicated his life, and including sacrificing his potential loss of life in Vietnam, because he believed so strongly in the principles that we espouse in the United States, but so strongly in supporting your country, so strongly in the rule of law. All of the things that are being eroded now under this administration, and it's up to all of us. I mean, it's not going to be them. It's us. I believe it's critical that anybody and everybody that can should write or reach out to or email or text or whatever form you want to use to your United States senator saying you cannot support this legislation. It will. I don't want to be the doomsday prophet here, but it's gonna lead to far more erosion in our democracy than we have ever even experienced before, and for no just reason. So there is no problem for which we need their solution. So, Michelle, I can't thank you enough.
Do I say one more thing?
No.
Voter registration.
Yes, you do.
It's April 6th. And so if you will be 18 years of age on or before the general election, which is going to be November 5th, you are eligible to register to vote in the primary. And fun fact, we had 777 people sign up to run for office this year, which was amazing, great numbers. Early voting is going to start the very next day on the 7th at 11 early voting locations. Our turnout is horrible. Don't let people take your rights away from your voting. Show up and vote. And if you need to know who's on your ballot, go to indianavoters.com. You can register to vote there. It is really one-stop shopping. You can register to vote now until that's taken away. You can apply for absentee ballots if you need it. You'll see your early voting sites. You can see your polling place. You can see who's on your ballot. It's a wealth of information. So indianavoters.com. If you haven't gone there and checked it out, you should.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I appreciate that public service announcement.
Always happy to
And as always, in the 25 or